taking people from a beta to an alpha, what does that even mean?
It's probably about 80% of the population go to school, go get a job. JOB stands for just over broke, in my opinion. And then they go out into the world and they borrow. They get a car, they get a house, they think that they're living the dream, but they find themselves essentially enslaved in debt under the control of those that they owe money to. They want you to have financial products and access to credit because that's where they make the vast majority of their money.
Tyranny and slavery are not the same thing. They're actually sort of opposite things, right? And the tyranny is the tyrant is the leader, right? The tyrant is the one commanding things, and the slave is somebody who has zero personal responsibility.
Our grandfathers had access to women that were significantly higher quality with lower effort. Today, you have access to lower quality women with much higher effort because you've got a lot of entitlement and a lot of other issues that sort of come around with social media.
Would you agree that this is sort of this reflexive feedback that makes it harder and harder and harder? We get less and less quality people.
Yeah.
So you agree with that?
Yeah.
Shouldn't we be challenging men to stand up, be good fathers, and lead good families?
That's the problem they're in, because the solution is strong, virtuous men leading the household. The problem is that men have responsibility to family today, but they don't have any authority.
I believe one of your views that you have is that maybe you don't agree in marriage. Rich.
Yeah.
Rebel Capitalist, here we are. We've had some good conversations getting started so far, but I want to talk about mental mindset, thought processes, around money, relationships, which I think are actually very related and sort of the same. But before we jump into that, just kind of real quickly tell me about the work that you do in regards to that already.
Yeah, so I'm a man of many talents, but I'm actually primarily spending most of my time creating content and writing books and stuff like that around helping guys make better decisions in their life when it comes to relationships and long-term relationships, if they're going to raise a family, have kids and stuff like that. A lot of the times I'm dealing with guys, helping them to untie the knot and get back on their feet in such a way where it causes like the least amount of damage when they have to get out of a marriage that's not working for them.
Yeah. So I've been married for almost 22 years, I think, somewhere around that range. Sorry, Stephanie, if you're listening. Somewhere around that range. And I would definitely agree that that's probably the most important decision you make in your life. But before we jump into that deep end of the water, which I want to come back to, before we started recording, we were just talking about both of our shared experience working in the call center industry.
Yeah.
And specifically around financial products. So I worked lead generation around multiple financial products. You did as well. And we were talking about some of the debt settlement stuff, people that had got themselves into the deep end of their credit situation. And you were just telling me that these types of people, sorry to stereotype them, but they couldn't even do basic math. Mm-hmm. And so they just couldn't even understand a basic concept of what my income is versus my expenses are. So what was the mindset of that type of a person going on? Like, what is holding them back at that point to not even be able to understand basic math like that?
Yeah, so, I mean, the title of my book is The Unplugged Alpha, so I put people into 4 different quadrants, and the bottom half of the quadrants, which I'll explain in my talk today, are basically the plugged in. You know, they're the sheep, the useful idiots, the ones that sit on their dots and wear the face diapers when the government told them what to do.
My kids call that the NPCs.
The NPCs, yeah, sure. That's how they end up with debt. And you know, there's a lot of marketing put behind financial institutions today, and they use slogans. And I'm going to change the language a little bit so it sounds different. But you've got a lot more money than you think. And then they'll invite them into the financial institutions. They'll give them instruments, products, and services that let them borrow and borrow more than what they can afford. And really, they do all of this to, like, it's a twofold process, but the financial institutions in Canada anyway, and I'm pretty sure it's very similar in the States, is they want you to have financial products and access to credit because that's where they make the vast majority of their money. They're lending out money they don't even have in their vaults. You know, they do it in such a way and they encourage people to use it and just make minimum monthly payments. And most people believe that'll get them out of debt, although at some point they overextend themselves and they get themselves to a point where it's like they're just throwing money basically in interest payments and they never see it go down, and they either are at the point of defaulting or they are defaulting. But there's a huge contingent of the population that lives that way, where it's just paycheck to paycheck, and there's always more month at the end of the money for them, and they slam up against a wall and they need help.
And those types of people, specifically in that quadrant, have a hard time building wealth.
Yeah.
And that's because of their mindset or their relationship around money?
Yeah, it's just a belief that they hold that it can go as far as anybody that's created wealth is just evil. You know, like they have that
Is that
sound
like a
bites.
victim mentality, or they sort of
Yeah, it's a
take
victim mindset, and it's like, you know, like money is the root of all evil, and those that have it have acquired it through nefarious means, and they're all bad people, and you know, it's an us versus them. So they think that, you know, if we sort of like hate on the rich or the wealthy or the people that have created wealth, it solves their problem in some sense or regard. But all it does is just like commiserates misery, sort of thing. It's like misery loves company.
Yeah. Okay. And what's the next quadrant?
So there's the plugged in, there's the unplugged, and then I'm mostly dealing with men, so we've got like the alphas and the betas, you know, which you'll see up on the slide when I talk about it, but I work getting guys towards the unplugged alpha category.
From a beta to an alpha?
Basically, yeah.
People can make that switch?
Very easily.
So it's certainly, I guess, then it would be more of a nurture versus a nature?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's 3 words. It's do the work.
Do the work.
Yeah, and I define, you know, what the work is when I get them through all that.
Did you go through Wake Up Warrior?
No, I've heard about it though.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, it seems like he maybe led that movement, as far as I know, about a decade ago.
Okay.
Garrett White and Wake Up Warrior, and that's kind of one of his sayings, like do the work, right? But we have to do the work. I have a saying that you can have everything that you want in the world, and it's all on the other side of work.
Yeah.
Right.
It's dressed in overalls and it looks like work, and most people don't want to do it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So taking people from a beta to an alpha, what does that even mean?
It means making pretty significant changes for.
But
most people.
how would you classify somebody as being a beta?
It's probably about 80% of the population. You know, if we're being honest, that's basically like a plugged-in beta. They're the useful idiots that comply with everything. They punch a clock. They go to a job. They do what they've been told to do, right? And they'll follow all the instructions that marketing, media, culture, Hollywood has been selling, music, all of these sources, inputs that, you know, have been selling them for basically their entire life. You know, go to school, listen to what they tell you to do in school, which is where they teach you to color within the lines and cross your T's and dot your I's. Go get a job. JOB stands for just over broke, in my opinion. And then they go out into the world and they borrow. They get a car, they get a house, they think that they're living the dream. But they find themselves essentially enslaved in debt under the control of those that they owe money to, you know, following their rules to make sure they continue to live. One of the biggest questions that I got during the Psychosis sickness was the notion of I have a house, I have a wife, I have kids, and my employer's telling me that I have to take this experimental jab to keep my job. I don't want to do it. I don't think I need it. It doesn't seem like it's something that's necessary. What do I do, Rich? It's like, what do you want me to tell you? You know, you've structured your life in such a way where you're fragile and you have to follow the rules that they set for you. If you're anti-fragile and you structure your life in such a way that you could opt out of this, then you'd have different options right now. But I can't solve this problem for you, obviously.
Well, you can, but it's going to be painful.
It's going to be painful. It's going to take years and a time machine to sort of put you back 5 years to get you to go through the steps that needed you to get to where you're at so you can opt out.
So one of your country's greatest exports, Jordan Peterson, talks about this. I just took my daughter to go see him in Los Angeles a couple weeks ago. And he talks about the story he's been talking about a lot lately is the story of Exodus. I don't know if you've heard him talking about that. But in the Bible, the story of Exodus is the Jews, the Israelites, they leave slavery of Egypt and then they are on the way to the Promised Land. But on the way to the Promised Land, they leave slavery and they have to go to the desert first. And so the story behind that is that you're in slavery and you want to go to the Promised Land, but you got to go to the desert first. And that's sort of like this story, right? So this guy doesn't want to take the jab, but he doesn't, you know, you can't really help him. And in order to get him to where he wants to go, he has to go to the desert first. You're going to don't take the jab, quit your job, but now you're in the desert. Now you have no income, you have no skills. What are you going to do? And you have to kind of get your way out of that. And eventually you can get to the Promised Land. Would you say that's a fair characterization?
That's a great analogy, I think. Yeah.
Yeah. You haven't heard Jordan Peterson talk about that?
No, I don't follow a lot of what he says because I see some errors in the advice that he's dispensed.
Yeah.
I think he's got some good stuff. I've listened.
You can't
to his
agree
books.
100% with anybody.
No, but it's just like one of those things where I look at the way that he's raised his kids and the results that his daughter's getting, sort of thing, and some of the advice that he's dispensed around marriage. He had a 3-part series that I saw on the Daily Wire, which I opted in to check it out. I don't think it's wise advice for guys when it comes to choices and who to invite into their life, because it's more about negotiating than it is to be a little more discerning in your taste and who you invite into your life. So I think there's some flaws in that, but he's got some good advice when it comes to psychology and the breakdowns of just life in general.
Another thing, back to the beta, the NPC that he talks about in this story, And he really went deep into it, and I hadn't really thought about it, but he talks about how tyranny and slavery are not the same thing. They're actually sort of opposite things, right? And the tyranny is the tyrant is the leader, right? The tyrant is the one commanding things, and the slave is somebody who has zero personal responsibility, because they just tell me what to do, tell me where to go, give me my food.
The NPCs.
The NPC, right?
Yeah.
So it's like, and then they get this slave mentality where they don't want to step up and take personal responsibility for themselves. They don't want to do the work because they're just used to being told what to do and have everything taken care of for them. And back to this story, the Exodus story, when they went to the desert, they didn't know what to do. They were slaves, and now no one's telling them what to do anymore.
Yeah.
So then they start quarreling and fighting and bickering, and they said, finally, let us just go back to Egypt where we were slaves, because at least we were taken care of and at least we had food. I mean, this is the story, right? So I mean, it's a pretty well fit for sort of the beta, the NPC, if you will, right?
Yeah, one of the things that I've come to realize and notice about humanity in general is that humans love a ruler. And there's always somebody or some entity that they want to serve.
Not everybody.
Not everybody, but the vast majority of humans want
the
to be ruled.
80% in that beta role.
Exactly. Yeah.
But let's talk about the alpha. So then, how do you characterize the alpha then? The opposite of that?
Yeah, the alpha is a guy that is admired, respected, is capable, competent, influential, can solve problems. I think that one of the most important skills that you have to develop as a man today is being an excellent problem solver, because that's what life is really throwing at you.
Which is the opposite of a slave.
Which is the opposite of a slave. They're looking for the next step, the next direction, the next task to do or follow, right? That's why they're so happy when they hear, there's this dangerous thing that we have to be careful with. So make sure you stand on these dots and you distance yourself and you wear face diapers. Absolutely, like what else do you want me to do, right? But that's the exact opposite, and that's a very small percentage of the population. It's not what the state wants. It's not what the rulers want. They don't want people making decisions for themselves. I think that slide that Gammon showed with the guy cracking the whip and the the large crowd and the few of them standing up versus bowing down and that changing towards the end is an excellent characterization of what that looks like.
Yeah. During the pandemic, Dr. Matthias Desmond got famous for that mass formation psychosis.
Yeah.
I'm sure you're familiar with that.
Yeah.
And he talked about how in this mass formation psychosis, where everybody sort of kind of goes along with this, and he breaks down the reasons why, lack of connection, all these different things. But he broke it down sort of into percentages. I think he said like 30% will always just go along with it, 30% will always resist it, and then you got this 40% in the middle.
Yeah.
That for the 40% is people that could potentially go either way. I mean, do you think that's a pretty good representation?
No, I think it's larger. I think it's closer to 75% that are just the sheep that will comply.
Right, but how many of those sheep are? I like to call them. There's a lot of comfortable wolves in that.
Yeah, so those comfortable wolves are the same guys that were doing I've got a mortgage, I got a wife and a kid, and I can't opt out of this. So what do I do? And it's like you're still having or forced to comply with their rules. You still have to play.
But some of them
by their
wake up,
game.
right? The lions wake up at some point, right?
Those are the guys that are influenced to wake up and take ownership and make some new choices.
So those are the people in the middle. So some people will never wake up.
Correct.
Some people are sort of in limbo, and some will maybe go to the not wake up, but some people will.
Correct. Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. Absolutely.
So that's why it's like, so the alpha is less than 30%. You think?
Less than 20.
Less than 20.
Yeah. It's a very small category.
Okay. So how do you help somebody make that jump?
Well, I unplug them from the lies. That's why the title of my book is The Unplugged Alpha. It's like, I love music. I always loved music when I was a kid. So when I hear albums that are around like, Metallica Unplugged or whatever it happens to be, I was like, okay, so let's check that out.
MTV used to do that series. With
Yeah. So it's like, the notion of getting out of their box, their matrix, if you will, if we can use that term that's popularized by Tate, unplugging from these comforting lies leads you to a new place of uncomfortable truths. And like we said earlier, these truths force you to wake up so that you're not sleepwalking through life. If you can use a red pill and a blue pill as like a notion through the movie, The Matrix, where the blue pill sort of like puts you back to sleep and you comply and you sleepwalk through life, versus the red pill, it enlightens you and awakens you and forces you to lean into this new reality and sort of dive down that rabbit hole and explore it.
Yeah. So back to the nature versus nurture. I mean, I've never had a job in my life. I've never filled out a resume, never submitted a resume. So I guess I would fall into the alpha role. I've never had a job. I've never been paid by anybody.
Yeah,
you're
one of the rare personalities that sort of go into the unplugged alpha as like a natural.
Yeah. So, and not to toot my own horn or whatever, but the nature versus nurture type of argument, right? So, why am I like that? Is it because my father was also an entrepreneur and that was what was modeled for me, and that's what I just decided to go do?
Yeah, it's going to be a product of your upbringing, basically how you spent your youth, your first 20 years of your life, how your family operated, the things that you guys did with your spare time, how you vacationed, where money was spent, what organized religion you may have subscribed to. There's lots in there that that'll mold you into the man that you become when you become an adult.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So my father was a contractor. Right, construction guy, so the entrepreneur. He made me go to work with him when I was a kid, so I like to say I saw behind the curtain. So he would go bid a job, and he would get the job, and he'd get the materials, he'd do the job, and basically I saw how the sausage was made, so to speak. And for me, it's always been like, I've never thought about getting a job. I just think about how can I make more money, right? How can I take my skills to the market? And I think that was just modeled to me. Also, being raised in a pretty large family, Southern Texas, gun hunting culture, if you will, right? Yeah. My parents were grassroots, politically organized, and grew up in the church, homeschooled for quite a bit of time, private school.
Yeah.
And so I kind of attribute that to like out of the box thinking, if you will.
Yeah, I think homeschooling is one of the more important things that if you're a parent today, you have to contemplate if you're going to raise kids and you don't want them to get drunk on their Kool-Aid. Because we operate in an us versus them world. It's always been that way. It's just that now today they want to create this empire of nothing, with the globalization and the adoption of their rules. So yeah, you definitely want to protect your kids from the influences and the programming that they're trying to get them to subscribe to. The pronoun crowd, the rainbow crowd, like all that sort of stuff, which they're trying to normalize, which was never normalized when we were kids.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm raising kids in California.
Yeah, it's got to be tough.
I get it. The schools are full of it. It's amazing. The public schools have tampons in the boys' bathrooms.
Right.
And I mean it's just incredible.
Yeah, our Prime Minister just mandated that corporations have to have tampons in men's washrooms now.
Yeah. Okay, now jumping into sort of some of the work that you might do with men, and you sort of help them like uncover some of these uncomfortable truths and sort of help them sort of make this shift if it's possible for them. And some of the things that you do is like really help them maybe think about their relationships, specifically around their spouse. Is that sort of like the main focus, not so much business partners?
Yeah, I think it's real important to be very discerning in who you invite into your life as a mother of your kids. Because if you're going to have children, which is still the main goal, like most guys will still say, I want a girlfriend and I want to have a family at some point. They need to make some wiser choices around that, because the talent pool that we have of available women to have children with or to invite into our life as a relationship, it's not the greatest of quality. I've had this.
The girls might say the same thing.
They will too, and they're absolutely right. But I mean, like the notion that our grandfathers had access to women that were significantly higher quality with lower effort, I believe is true, because today you have access to lower quality women with much higher effort, because you've got a lot of entitlement and a lot of other issues that sort of come around with social media and the cool.
Would higher quality be subjective?
Sure. Yeah, it's certainly subjective, but in my grandparents' era, there was a lot less going on that was polluting the minds of society that exists today.
I think I think I could agree with that. Obviously, it's subjective to your point, but I mean, to some of the stuff, obviously, society's gone downhill. So to your point, I mean, there's a lot less pollution, or a lot more pollution, I suppose. So one of the things I see, I've been married for over 20 years now. I got married before internet dating and all of that stuff, which I kind of think is a blessing for me in a way, right? I know from being a business entrepreneur, marketing person, that the more choices someone's given, the less likely they are to decide.
Yeah, it's absolutely true.
And what I see today with all this selection everywhere, it's like they don't decide, and then the longer they don't decide, the more they start critiquing, and then they like build this like perfect model. Whereas you referenced your grandfather's day. Your grandfather's day, they didn't have near the selection. There was a couple girls, and they just grabbed one and they made it work.
Who was in a work environment, who was in the village, who was in the church. So
they grabbed one and they made it work.
Yeah.
Right? And for me, I grabbed one and I made it work.
Yeah.
And I've almost thought today, and I've talked about this with a couple girls on some other podcasts, where like there's a whole lot wrapped into this, and this is a very complex subject, but like almost where like arranged marriage could work if people were good, and they're not.
I'll actually take that a little bit further, because I do these podcasts where we have ladies show up on the panel. We call it Ladies Night, and one of the questions that I'll throw their way sometimes is, how would you feel about your father vetting your dating choices? And it's interesting because
Depends on the father.
Well, it's interesting because a lot of them that will say yes will have a great relationship with their dad. The ones that will say no, why does he need to get involved? They don't either have a great relationship with their dad or an absent father, single mother household. So they don't value the opinions of a strong, masculine, virtuous man that they can sort of rely on to help them make an important life decision. Because I think a lot of women today, they're just, they don't have a lot of respect for masculinity. Which is why you see this toxic version of feminism that's essentially like a supremacy movement that wants to subjugate and control men to bend the knee to everything, basically.
Yeah, so it's sort of like this downward spiral, if you will, in a sense, because reflexivity almost, right? Where it's like, if there wasn't a good model for you to grow up under, then the chance of you creating a good model is diminished,
right?
Let's just say, right? So we were talking ahead of time, and one of the things I was thinking about as I sort of was getting a little bit older, I knew that I wanted to get married. I grew up with a good model of a family. My parents are still married today, had 5 kids in the family, and I wanted to get married and have kids at some point as well. I had plenty of friends that never, they knew from the beginning they never wanted to get married and have kids. And most of them came from horrible families, but I always wanted to, right? And so, we dated, and then at some point it was like, I'm not gonna date girls unless I at least see potential. Not that I wanna like, hey, will you marry me on the first date? But at least is there like some potential there? And some of those things were like, were their parents still married? Did they have a good household? Because girls that I had dated before did not have that, and it was just one thing after another all the time. Not that it's their fault, but it's just this reflexive loop feedback. So I guess one, would you agree that this is sort of this reflexive feedback that makes it harder and harder and harder? We get less and less quality people.
Yeah.
So you agree with that?
Yeah.
Then two, how do we fix that? Now I would say that we fix it starting with my family.
Yeah.
And my kids could hopefully find other good kids, and maybe we could sort of change it that way. And the reason why I would say that, and I want to see if you agree with that, and the reason I would say that is because then if that is the case, then shouldn't we be challenging men to stand up, be good fathers, and lead good families?
That's the problem they're in, right? Because the solution is strong, virtuous men leading the household. The problem is that men have responsibility to family today, but they don't have any authority. So as an example, in most households today in the West, the state is the head of the household. And if you don't believe that, go through the divorce process, and you'll understand very quickly how the state is, in fact, at the head of the household. And the legislation that's written in family law is not designed to protect the children, which is what they purport when they have written the laws. But what it's designed to do is essentially subjugate and extract control, wealth, and resources from him, move them over to her, and then let her decide what happens to the money when it deals with the kids. So that's why you'll see guys.
Through a divorce proceeding.
Yeah, so I mean that's when it becomes really obvious. You can have it.
But it's over at that point. That's too late. You've already failed.
Well, I mean, you can see it become obvious in social gatherings, where you'll see guys use terms like, well, happy wife, happy life, or I got to see what the boss says, sort of thing. And it's like they're deferring their authority and their responsibility to the other half, my better half. And that's just disparaging men and masculinity in general. I think women want a strong masculine leader in the household. I think women admire strong masculine leaders in the household. I think women want to look up to a good man that's good at being a man and also a good man. But there's, like you mentioned earlier, I think there's a shortage of that. There's a lot of soft, weak men today that are.
Let me push back on
Sure,
that a minute.
go.
So again, I mean this. I'm not trying to get like we're just talking openly here, but like 5 weeks ago, I was in Alaska jumping out of helicopters. I broke my wrist snowboarding. 3 weeks before that, I was in Mexico surfing the giant waves. And 2 weeks from now, I'll be in Australia on an 8-day outback dirt bike trip. I've trained jiu-jitsu and Muay Thai for 10 years. I have metal in every limb of my body. I've had 8 surgeries. I've started multiple companies, multiple exits. You might say I'm a man's man,
Right.
maybe, compared to most guys, right?
On the surface, I would say you're a good man that's also good at being a man, and your track record of success in your family shows that.
I can fight, I can shoot guns, I've done competition gun training.
These are a lot of the requirements that sort of build that avatar.
Right, okay. But at the same time, I've been married for a long time, and there's a lot of things that I defer my wife to. Like, I kind of let her run the home, and so
As you should.
Before I make plans, I'm going to check with my wife. Hey, are we busy? Like, does this sound good? Like, so I defer a lot of that stuff to her, and I look at our relationship as a partnership, and so I would always want to check with a partner. At some point, someone has to have 51% ownership,
Right.
because someone has to make a decision. But at the same time, I look at her as a partner. I would defer to her as a partner. I would be somebody that you just characterized that would say, hey, I need to check with the boss. I would say that. Now, ultimately, I'm the boss. But you kind of have to know when to pick and choose your battles, right? And so I kind of fall into what you just characterized as somebody who's not taking leadership, but at the same time, I don't know if that really fits.
So let's use that example of let me check with the boss. Like, rather than using language publicly that overtly states let me check with the boss, you're implying that she has authority over the relationship, which she doesn't, because the way that you lead your life, the way that you describe, tells me that you're the head of the household. So rather than saying I got to check with the boss, it's like, we've got some vacation planning, we have a trip, let me just make sure it doesn't conflict with any other obligations that we have. That's almost the same thing, but you're not disparaging yourself and subjugating yourself, right? So it's just being a little bit more mindful with the way that you navigate.
I mean, I agree with what you're saying in a sense where a woman wants a man to lead.
Yeah.
Like, make the dinner plans.
Yeah.
Like, come up with a plan. But
that's the biggest complaint that women have on the dating marketplace today is they meet guys on dating apps and places like this, and they can't set the date. They don't know where to go. They don't know what time.
It's like, if you can't set the date, how can you plan our life?
Exactly.
So my wife has relied on me to plan our life, right? She doesn't get involved in the business and what my 10-year plans are, or any of that, right? But she has trust that I'll take care of things, right? But then on the smaller stuff, I let her deal with most of that, right?
Yeah. So there's this notion of blue jobs and pink jobs, right? And I think that we've blurred those lines now, where we have, we had this movie that popped up in the 80s, Mr. Mom, that it was in Tootsie, things like this was sort of like the pivoting point of blurring the lines and blending the lines of masculinity and femininity. I think there's certain obligations that you have as a man. Like, for example, if there's a bang in the night downstairs, you're not going to elbow the wife and be like, well, because of feminism and equality, I think that you should get this one. Yeah. So go downstairs and deal with whatever that noise was. You're going to jump out of bed. You're going to get the firearm. You're going to deal with whatever's going on down there, because that's your obligation. You're trained in physical violence. You know how to use it to protect yourself and your family. You're going to go deal with that. But at the same time, if something comes up that requires a pink job, you'll ask the wife.
Yeah. So I like to think of it as a partnership, and back to how important it is to choose your right partner. Like, I couldn't imagine getting to where I've been without having a good partner behind me. I've seen many of my friends.
Do you refer to her as your partner when you introduce her, or when you talk about her?
No, of course she's my wife.
Your wife.
And I want to get to that part next. I want to get into that. But I've seen many of my friends who have wives who don't support them and are constantly holding them back and nagging them and complaining, like, don't do this, don't do that, and or they don't help with the kids or the household, and now the dad has to do all that, and I could see how difficult that could be. I mean, how could you ever operate at a high level if you don't have that support, right? But back to that question about being a partner. So I believe one of your views that you have is that maybe you don't agree in marriage.
No, I don't agree in living in such a way that looks like marriage to the state.
Okay.
You can love a woman, you can have family, you can do all of those things, but I think that you should be careful in the way that you structure it, because there's a lot of inputs and negative information that's encouraging women to behave differently today. And the thing with women that you have to understand with their nature is that they always reserve the right to change their mind at any given time. That's why if you talk to a divorce lawyer, one of the first things they'll tell you is the woman that you married is never going to be the same woman that you get divorced from. So I think that you have to take some protective measures when you're dealing with women, because having a family or living in a way that looks like a marriage to the government invites
so what does
legislation
that mean,
and law into your life.
Looks like a marriage to the government?
Well,
you're talking about getting legally married.
No, like even common law. Like if you live together in the same household and you have kids and you've been there in the same place, in Canada would be 2 years, you're basically married. So family law would apply, right? And you didn't opt into marriage by getting married and having a ceremony and signing the certificate, but because you live in a way that looks like marriage to the government, you're now married. So if she wants to change things, untie the knot, leave, take the kids, family law is now governing the way that you're going to deal with your wealth and access to your own DNA and your children.
And, I mean, that's a bad thing?
It is, because it's not in your favor.
So you should not live together, so then they don't view you that way?
No, I'm not saying don't do that, but I mean, the guy that's 20 that wants to have kids needs to make a different set of decisions than the guy that might be divorced that already has children.
Let me throw this out there. You might not agree with this.
Sure.
Because I got a lot of pushback on my Alaska trip a few weeks ago on this.
Mm-hmm.
I have 2 daughters, and I tell my daughters, don't live with a guy unless you're married.
Right.
And the reason why I tell them that is because for me, I didn't want to live with my wife until we were married. Part of it obviously is because I believe I'm a Christian, right? And so I believe that. But the other part of it was like, I was single. Why did I want to bring a girl in and be married? Like, I was still living my single life. Until I was ready to be married, I didn't want to be married. So for me, it was like, no, we're not living together. I'm not ready for that. But by the time I was ready for that, I was like, well, then let's just get married. And I've seen way too many of other girls I know, my wife's friends, et cetera, who have been in 7-year relationships and the guy doesn't want to get married and they get broken up, and another 4-year. Next thing you know, they're 35, 40 years old and they've never been married.
Yeah.
And my friends' kids, and like they live with these guys for 7 years and they never want to get married. And so I just told my daughters, like, look, don't live with them until they're ready to get married. Like, make them make that commitment. And so a lot of my friends gave me pushback on this, and they say, but that's ridiculous. Like, I don't want to get married, but we're committed. We're committed. So anyway, what do you think about that?
Well, marriage is interesting. There's this book called Marriage: A History. Stephanie Coontz is the author, and the notion of marriage throughout history, up until recent times, was about the acquisition of in-laws. There was very little, if any, law enforcement. There was very little, if any, governance. There was very little, if any, government. Taxation was a totally different structure. So you would meet somebody, they would have a family of big, strong men that were maybe good at being men. They were maybe farmers. They had a cobbler, a blacksmith in their family, maybe a medical professional. You had certain, skills and tools of the trade and land, and to acquire certain things. So you would blend those two things, and you would acquire their skills and their resources as part of that marriage, right? Like, that's why when you watch these movies with like kings and queens, it's like, they'll only invite highbrow sort of nobility from a certain country to marry their children, because that would create some sort of alliance. They could rely on their military for future use and stuff like that. So it was never about love. And she looked at diaries, court records. She looked at everything that she could find to sort of get all this data, but it was about the acquisition of in-laws. Today, it's about love. It's about coming together, sort of thing. But the original notion that existed for like 95% of history, that marriage was a thing, is different. I think if you have a daughter, it's different from the conversation that you're going to have with a son. I think with a daughter, you want to say, yeah, you don't want to live with a guy. I think that you want to preserve your value if you're a girl. You don't want to be promiscuous, because your main value to a guy still is your purity. I think for a son, though, he wants to get to know the girl. He wants to see what she's made of. And I think that one of the big problems that guys run into today when it comes to inviting a woman into their life, depending on how they want to live, but inviting her into his life on a long-term basis, you need to be sure that she is who she says that she is. And you're going to have a better chance of that by living with her. It's far better for a guy to have that conversation, to live with a girl before he makes a long-term commitment, to see what she's made of, because people act. A lot of the times you can be with a representative for a year or two, and then when you say I do, that representative leaves, and then you're left with a real person. So it's different advice that I give to men and women.
So this goes back to a couple things that I want to bring back to this. So then, one, I would say, going back to, I got married at a time without internet dating, so I didn't have all those choices. And just like your grandfather, not as much, but I had less choice, not as less as your grandfather, but I had less choice. So we picked one and we made it work. So you find somebody that you have shared values with, and someone, and then you just make it work. Now, if you choose the wrong person, they may not be willing to make it work. So maybe they came from a horrible background. All they know is their parents have been divorced 37 times, and the first time they get in a fight, they just leave, etc.
Yeah.
Well, then they're probably going to do the same thing. But like going back to an arranged marriage or your grandfather, like, couldn't we just make it work? So like, why do you have to live together? I mean, you've dated for a year, you've seen them in multiple situations, you've seen the waiter spill food on them, you've seen how they treat other people, how responsible they are with their own finances, et cetera. Like, that's pretty good. Like, can't we just make it work?
I think you can with a daughter with the father's guidance, okay? But you said something there that I found very interesting. You said make it work a number of times. So for example, one of the greatest predictors of a successful marriage is going to be a woman that hasn't spent her youth being promiscuous. Because the whole make it work notion existed because promiscuity was shamed back in the days. There's a slang term of slut shaming, which is something that mostly happened from mothers and grandparents to the daughters to discourage them from sharing their body with a bunch of men. So a woman that's been with 50 guys today, which isn't that uncommon when she gets married in her 30s, if he's number
guys?
51,
That's not uncommon?
it's not.
See, I've been married so way too long.
I know,
That
but
sounds insane.
if he's number 51 and they're going to get married and there's conflict in the marriage, her idea of making it work is just going to guy number 52 and untying the knot and getting divorced to see if she can make it work with the next guy.
So my idea of making it work, and I'll ask you this question. So you referenced earlier, now we get married for love. We didn't used to get married for love. We got married for utility. Today we get married for love. So then I would ask you, is love a feeling or is love an action?
Love is a feeling.
Love's a feeling.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's where I would disagree.
Yeah, it's something that you feel towards somebody else.
So I believe love is an action, right? So the Bible lays it out clearly that love is patient, love is kind, love is not self-serving, love doesn't keep records of wrongs, love doesn't put themselves above others. So if I treated you that way, then you're going to feel a certain way back about me. And so in an arranged marriage with somebody I don't know, I could treat you with love. I could put your needs above mine, not ride you, all these different types of things, and that would then cause that feeling back. And so that's what I mean by the make it work. Like if we treat each other lovingly, if we treat each other, or with love, I should say, with respect, then that would then cause that feeling. What happens is when both parties don't do that, then it causes a problem. What's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I could see that angle. It's
the fake it till you make it.
Yes, that's the best way to sort of do it, is it? Yeah.
Because if I treat you that way, you're going to love me. It's what's the syndrome where you fall in love with your nurse kind of thing?
Yeah, sorry, I can't.
But because that nurse has treated you so lovingly, you fall in love with the nurse.
Yeah.
Right? It's even, the Stockholm syndrome, where you even fall in love with your prisoners when they show you kindness.
Yeah, and I mean, women fall in love for different reasons than men. I think men love more idealistically and women love more opportunistically. Because of their hypergamous nature, they want the best that they can get, which is what they're always trying to evaluate. Guys, not so much. It's very interesting because I get challenged on this. Like if I'll have a panel or a group of gals and they might say, well, guys are hypergamous too. They want the best they can get. Not exactly the same. Women want a man, like they have a long laundry list of what they want in a man. He's got to be tall, funny, competent, influential, alpha, beta, soft, strong, very long list. And it's like they want the best that they can absolutely get. And that's one of the things that they have a problem with today is they have so many options because of social media with unlimited validation.
Girls have
and
some
likes.
options or both?
It's both, but it's mostly women that have greater options, right? I mean, women generally have greater options than men, broadly speaking, but they've got greater options to men because of social media, because of dating apps. These are all things that didn't exist 20, 30 years. Men just prioritize availability.
Right, which is why women have it easier because men are less picky, and if they're available, then
yeah, like George was talking about this once. He said, I asked a room, hey fellas, would you date a attractive gal that worked at McDonald's? And the vast majority of guys said yes, right? You ask women, would you date an attractive man that works at McDonald's? The vast majority of women will say no.
Sure, because they value different things.
Right.
Yeah. And certainly the fiat monetary system that's causing lower and lower standard of living doesn't help that at all.
Yeah, so there's a smaller pool of marriageable guys right now. And because women are climbing the corporate ladder and chasing careers and putting off marriage and children, a lot of the times they're pricing themselves out of the market.
Now, one thing that I'll certainly agree with you on, but I want to see if this is what you mean. But there was the whole government wanting to legalize same-sex marriages and say who you could marry and this and that. And I am certainly not a big government guy. I'm for less government and more freedom. And so I certainly don't need the state to tell me what I can do and can't do. But I do believe in marriage, and I do believe in that commitment, because like I'm ready to go build my life with this person. And so just like I would enter if I was going to start a business with somebody, we would want to have a formal commitment where we've like, okay, let's do this thing. Let's line up and let's go, right? And so like I believe in that formal commitment with my wife, and whether that's done through the church, whether it's done through the state, whether, I don't know, but for me that seems like a very important piece, not just for the hard commitment of building that life, but more even so to the point of we have this, as we've already talked about, this reflexive loop where people have been modeled a bad situation and it just keeps getting worse, worse, worse. And so if we want to correct that, it starts with me, I believe. I'm a man of personal responsibility. I lead by example. And so like I want to example that for my family. So then I want to be a strong father. I want to have a good family. I want to raise my kids properly. And I hope that would influence future generations. So the marriage piece seems like a big piece to me. Do you agree with that? Or it sounded like you were thinking that you don't believe in the act of marriage.
So let me ask this question. You've got an older daughter. Is your guidance today square away being independent, strong, and capable as a woman, or is your guidance today you should really focus your priority on finding a husband?
Probably the former, right? I want her to be able to take care of herself.
Yeah.
And the interesting thing about this is when she was younger, she told my wife, she's like, I just want to be like you, Mom. I want to be a trophy wife. Which my wife kind of took objection to. She's like, what do you mean? I'm not just some trophy wife, right?
Yeah.
But maybe that was the model that she had been shown, right? Where the mom stays at home kind of a thing. And my daughter wants to get married, and she wants to have a family.
Yeah. At what age though?
Sooner than later, probably, right? But I tell her, like, that's fine. And I said, baby, I want that for you. I want you to have that life, but I also want you to have the skills to take care of yourself so you don't have to end up getting stuck in a bad relationship.
Right.
So I want her to have that, but I want her to be able to have choices for herself so she's not forced into that.
See, so what you're doing is you're creating a conflict, because what you said earlier is that you should work things out, but then you're also giving her the advice that she should be able to take care of herself in case she gets stuck into the wrong relationship.
No, it's not.
So that's almost like giving the opt-out for divorce.
It's not in case and there's an opt-out. It's so that she doesn't jump into something bad.
Yeah.
I think.
Okay. So
I just don't, I don't want her to go like, well, this guy's kind of a loser, but he says he's going to take care of me, so I guess I'll go for it. It's like she could be a little bit more picky.
Yeah.
And I want her to be picky. Why not?
Yeah.
Why shouldn't she? She's absolutely gorgeous.
Yeah.
She's super smart and talented.
Is there an age range that you recommend her to date in, or do you offer any guidance there?
Like in her, what age range?
Yeah, like, looking for a future husband.
Honestly, that's a conversation that we haven't had. The older that we get, I think the less age is a factor, meaning like when you're 11 years old, 1 year difference is big, right? When you're 40 years old, 40 or 50, like whatever, right?
Yeah.
So I think as you get older, that range probably matters less. But like I said, honestly, that's a conversation that we've never had.
So let's just say that she's 20, and like if she brought home a guy that's like 30 or 35, would that be a problem for you?
I think so.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What would be the cap, like the ceiling, 25, 30, like?
Probably 25.
Yeah.
Maybe a little higher, but certainly in the 20s.
See, for me, when I
she's got a boyfriend
evaluate
now, he's 23.
Yeah, like I wouldn't have a problem if she's 20, she brought home a 30-year-old. If the guy's squared away, he's solid, he's got a good life, he's competent, he's influential, he's the unplugged alpha sort of
guy. I wouldn't say that. I hadn't really thought about this, so you're catching me off guard here. I wouldn't say that's the single most important factor. It's a range of things.
Yeah.
If you're 30 and you're a deadbeat, right, versus 30 and you're put together and you're a good guy, right? So there's a range of factors in there. I would say.
I mean, like most younger guys, especially in their early 20s, they're kind of like going downstream, with the dead fish. They don't know really what they're doing. There are some rare exceptions, but I think on a balance of probabilities, and I operate in balance of strong probabilities.
But that's almost a non-starter though, because that's almost a non-starter. So for me, I believe that like your early 20s is when you put your life together.
Okay.
And I think that most people waste that most important time. And for the reason why I think it's
right. So if you want your daughter to get married, wouldn't you want her to find a guy that's already got his life together rather than putting his life together, because he's demonstrated a strong track record of success at 30 versus 23 trying to figure it out?
Yeah, I'm not saying saying she should get married to a 23-year-old. I'm
Yeah.
certainly not saying that. I got married when I was 28,
Yeah.
which is young, seemingly in today's standards. My wife was 24 at the time.
Yeah.
So yeah, I'm not saying she's married 23-year-old, but thankfully, thank God, my biggest fear is that she goes with some deadbeat, and she's probably not going to listen to this, so it probably won't matter. But she's had so far she's had 3 boyfriends, and they've all been great people, all great guys that I think are really great choices.
Why didn't they turn into a marriage?
Well, I mean, she's in high school, right,
Okay.
or whatever, right? So one of her last boyfriend was, I thought he was a stud, like buff, great family, super motivated, but she's like, I'm not feeling it, whatever. They're young, right? Obviously. Right. She's going out with a pro surfer now. He's like the #1 rookie on the world tour. Like to make it to the highest level of sport, you're obviously very focused and you're on your path, right? Like I like that. Does it mean he's got everything figured out in life? No. And obviously, like, I'm not expecting him to get married in a year or 2 either. But like, it's for me, it's more of like, do they have the raw ingredients and are they going in the right direction? But I don't know. We're going down a whole rabbit hole there. But the question I wanted to ask, though, is it sounded like maybe before we started recording that you were talking about that you didn't really even believe in marriage. Like, you think most guys should not get married. They should just be in a partnership.
Yeah, for men, it's not a good deal. For women, it's a great deal because it's low risk, high reward. Because they're hypergamous, they're going to marry across and up on a socioeconomic scale. They're generally going to find or marry a guy that's wealthier, more successful, more influential, more competent, all those sorts of things. So for guys, it's not generally the best deal. So for most men, it's like you really have to evaluate what you're dealing with before you invite her into your life. And even then, I would encourage them to take precautionary steps. So, I mean, half the time the knot is going to untie based on the statistics today. So why not live somewhere that's friendly towards fathers? So that's another idea that you have to sort of have a conversation about, because right now on the National Parental Organization site, they have a report card that rates all the states in the US as far as where the best place is for fathers. So if you lived in a state that's hostile, for example, you might want to move to Florida, Michigan, or even California. California's got downsides with maintenance and alimony, but when it comes to custody, it's 50-50 by default. You don't have to fight over that. So there's important decisions that you have to make when it comes to getting married, rather than let me just get married to the first girl that touches my pee-pee, which is the thought process that most guys make, because like I said earlier, men prioritize availability. So if she's responsive and likes him and wants to see him and responds when he texts her, sort of thing, for him that's great, right? But she has a longer laundry list of stuff that she's going through. So again, it's very, very different conversations that I would have with a son versus a daughter. And those are contradictory, by the way.
Yeah, they are. Obviously, I picked up on that. Yeah. Okay. Interesting stuff. I think back to the nature versus nurture. Like, obviously, we've led different lives and we've come to different outcomes, and so then we see the world differently.
Yeah.
Which is last night we had these debates about money, and I said that's what makes a market, right? We have different views on it. For me, I just see it differently. For me, it was like, why would I ever have a girl sign a prenup? Like, to me, that seems like I'm saying the marriage is doomed before it's even started. And that's just my thought process.
Yeah.
And that might be naive, but I'm also in the thought process that like, man, if I got divorced from my wife, I'd probably just want to give her half.
Yeah.
Like, why wouldn't she get half?
It's
like, she's
not always just half, and then there's also elements
or whatever
that you can
the
write
name.
into the prenup that will govern that relationship as the knot is
Yeah,
untied.
I think, but you had said something earlier, like with my,
because it's still a legal contract. I mean, you're okay with signing the legal contract of marriage, but you're not okay with signing a contract that prepares how the marriage might dissolve if you get out of it. It's like, if you in
a business partnership, you would put
boil
that
it down
into
to like a business partnership or leasing a car, but it's well written in the point where this is how you're going to govern, the use of this, during the time that you have it. But if there's an end to it, this is how we untie that part, sort of thing. So I think being intentional about it, it's not unromantic. It's not promising that it's going to end, or it encourages it to the end in any sense of regard, in my opinion. I think every divorce lawyer that I've ever talked to, it's always like, look, if you're going to get married, you should have a prenup, but that's only really necessary if one of you has a lot more than the other. That's only really necessary if you have kids from a prior marriage that you want to make sure get your stuff, rather than her kids from her prior marriage, sort of thing. So there's places and time with it, but I mean, if you've got 2 young kids that are in their early 20s and they're going to form a family and they have nothing to show, like they're bringing nothing to the table except for maybe a degree and a couple of bucks they have in the bank, it's not necessary at that point.
Yeah. Sure, yeah. You're a billionaire and you're marrying a girl. Like, you probably put that in place.
Yeah.
I get it. And so there's a lot of nuance to these things, for sure.
Yeah.
Well, let's wrap this up, Rich. It's been certainly an interesting conversation. So maybe you can end it with a piece of advice. So for the guy, let's just talk to the men out there. Most of my audience is men. You're mid-career. You're in your 30s. Maybe you're starting to feel demasculated in a sense, midlife crisis, maybe whatever it is. You're starting to realize that maybe all the lies, the pre-programming that you've been given are not accurate. So I think a lot of people that probably watch my channel are starting to wake up to that. Mm-hmm. What type of advice do you have to give somebody to kind of like turn their lives around and move from that beta to that alpha category?
Yeah, I got lots of resources on stuff like that, obviously, with all my content.
Yeah, go ahead and tell us where we can find those.
Yeah, they can start at my website. It's just richcooper.ca. But doing the work on themselves to create the man that is going to be of use to themselves primarily, like fixing their own deficiencies, will allow them to make better choices and have better options when it comes to women, how they're going to live their life, how they're going to navigate it, how money's going to move for them. So unplugging from the comfort and lies that society sells is really the first step. And speaking to your audience, since they follow you, I think that you're a good model for that, because of the way that you've sort of structured your life. Like, you are the natural unplugged alpha, right? Like the way that you live, the way that you work, the way that you travel, your competency skills, your level of influence. I think you're a great model for that. So just do what Mark does.
Cool. All right, Rich, thanks so much.
Yeah, man.